Vanita Campbell, we call her Miss V, who has been joining me as my co-host. And then, hey, Miss V, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, good. Thank you for hopping on. And then we have Miss Melva Thompson-Robinson. How you doing, Melva?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good. So, Vanita and I definitely wanted to come on and talk about all that's been going on with the draft and just talking about what that experience is like for mothers and just our opinion on, everything that we've seen happen over the last couple of days. And I thought about you because naturally being an NFL mom and the mom of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who I know and love and who played with the Cleveland Browns, I just wanted to kind of get your opinion, as an NFL mom, and then certainly somebody who has supported a son who's had history with the Cleveland Browns, where Shedeur Sanders was selected to go to. So I thank you so much for taking time to come on with us.
No problem. No problem.
Absolutely. So starting off with Dorian. Dorian and my son Theo played together at UCLA, and Dorian was selected. He was the 140th pick, correct?
Yes.
And that was in 2023, and he was selected or drafted by the Cleveland Browns. And what was that experience like for you, Melva? I know we were all excited. Ecstatic. Even though it was the Cleveland Browns, we were happy.
Right. It was a good experience. It's nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so as the 140th pick, he went in the 5th round. Mm-hmm. So, we had an idea that we pretty much knew he wasn't going to go first round. So Thursday we were like, okay, cool. Then Friday, there was a thought that he might go 2nd or 3rd round.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you're kind of sitting there and, it's almost like watching the clock tick down. You're like, okay, we're on this pick, we're on that pick. Okay. All right. We're through round 2. We're into round 3. We're, through round 3. Like, it's like, just like nerve wracking,
Right.
Fortunately for us, 2 of Dorian's agents came out to hang with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we had gotten a suite at the Palms Casino.
Okay.
Hotel and casino. So we were hanging out there. So it was good, but it was nerve-wracking because you're just like, oh my God, when is this gonna happen? And I have pictures of like his agents over in the corner. They're like on the phone with teams and texting people, to see what was going on. And I can't remember if it was either that Friday night or that Saturday morning. Somebody, one of my friends, texted me and was like, girl, don't worry about it. Yes, they've gone through 3 rounds of the draft already. But over half of the people that are going to be drafted have not been drafted yet.
Mm-hmm.
They will be drafted on Saturday. So just remain calm. Like you're good.
Right.
And, you take a deep breath. We came in that morning because, it's West Coast time. So it starts like 8. I mean, not 8, but like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, so we all gathered back at the suite. One of my friends from Wisconsin, her and her husband came out. Some of Dorian's high school classmates came. So I just ordered, I was like, forget this. We're having mimosas, So I ordered stuff for mimosas and we ordered stuff for breakfast and just, sat there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, after a while, I was like, I cannot sit here, just to sit here anymore. And he had one of those suites that had a balcony with a pool, like off the
I
balcony.
remember.
So me and my friend from Wisconsin, we just like made tea. We went and sat outside and just talking, like we're not even caught up in the draft stuff. Like we just, like it's too much, And all of a sudden, like his agent comes flying out and was like, it's happening. And I was like, what?
Wow.
I mean, like that's how far like my mind had gone away from the draft. I'm like, what? And he's like, he's getting drafted. He's going home. And I'm like, and then I'm like, he's going to the Panthers? Like, I didn't think the Panthers were in the mix. And they were like, no, he's going to the Browns. And I was like, oh my God. Like I just was not even, thinking about the, that or anything like that. And so, like everything is like on a delay, like you get a call and then they're like, okay, we're going to call you back. And it's like a FaceTime and stuff like that. And I just remember like sitting there on the couch next to him, and I had the Browns hat and I was going to hand it to him when it was announced. And I'm like, okay, so like, when are they? Because like, I was sitting outside. I had no idea what was going on inside. I'm like, so when are they going to announce it? When are they going to show us highlights? Like, what? I don't understand.
Well, how did they know that they were going to draft him? Like they had called him, right?
They call first.
Right.
And then they call, I guess they called back like on FaceTime or something, or a Zoom link, so that they can get the video, to show and stuff like that. And so it's just like you think like the player's just sitting there and then it's announced on TV and that's how they find out, but that's not how.
Right.
So did they call the agent first? Did they call his agent first and then tell him and then they let your son know and then they recreate it?
No, they call him first. I think the agent gets a text message from the NFL or from somebody and they're notified, and at that same time that's when Dorian was getting his call. So it's not like I can't stress enough, like it is not like, oh yeah, we're all sitting in front of the TV watching, and then it's announced on TV, and we jump up, yay! And we're, like that's like the first time we're hearing it. Like, no, we've heard it for a minute.
And the funny thing is that I used to always wonder, how did y'all get the hats? Like, how did you get the hats if you didn't know who was gonna draft you?
Well, so I can explain that. Like his agents went and had hats shipped to us.
Okay.
And whoever they got the hats from didn't have all the hats. So when they came to Vegas, they had to go like to Dick's or Lids or somebody and get more hats, get the missing hats. So we had all the hats like spread out across the bar.
You got to get all the different teams that you think you may be drafted to?
We had all the teams.
Wow.
Yeah. So, because you never know. And like, I have a cousin who played in the league for a long time. And part of what he does is like, this draft reviewing and stuff like that of players and stuff. And he was just like, like sometimes what happens, people don't realize is like the GM may, come up with the draft board, or the head coach and the GM come up with the draft board. He's like, and then the owner's been on vacation and comes back in right before the draft and says, nope, this is what we're doing. You know what I mean? So it's nerve-wracking. I can tell you though, it is relieving when it's finally announced and he's drafted. Then it's like, okay. And we just, like, I was very cognizant. I was like, I want, like intimate people, small party there with us watching the draft. And then I'm like, we can invite more people over after you get drafted, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because again, I had, you know, I think out of Dorian's high school class, there's like 5 or 6 guys that are now in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the first one went through the draft process, his mom was like, girl, she's like, you know, we heard everything from first round pick to, you know, 3rd or 4th round pick. And then he didn't get drafted until the 5th round. And so, you know, and she was like, if this was during COVID, it was during 2020. And she was like, we had the NFL cameras set up and everything like that. And, you know, she's like, it's hard. After a while, she's like, we took the cameras down going into the 3rd day because we just, you know, like, we just didn't know what was going to happen. And we just didn't want all of that, you know,
on display.
Right.
And then the air gets sucked out of the room, I'm sure, when you're sitting there and you go from, you know, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, you know,
you're looking at who else is getting drafted and drafted ahead of you and all of that. And you're like, we're all looking at each other like, how did that person get drafted ahead of, you know?
How
and you're
about
like,
that?
It's nerve-wracking. You know, it's not like, you know, like when you're going through the college recruiting process, you know, like all of these teams say, yes, we want you. And then you choose the team that you want to go to.
Right.
The NFL, it's different. You know, you go through the process and then they invite you for visits and things like that. And maybe that's to check off things or to say, yeah, like that, what we thought we wanted, that's not him. And then you're going, okay, you know, now somebody has to choose you. And that's, you know, that's because you don't know it's not a process you can control, you know.
Right. And we certainly saw that this weekend, you know, with all we thought and what all we wanted and whatever the case may be, you're not in control of that at all.
Right.
So that was interesting. You said a lot of things that we saw this weekend, and a lot of people who don't know this process don't know it. I mean, we can assume a lot of things, but you don't know what that's like. What you just said about the coaches, the head coaches, and other people being in there, the GM, or then the owner comes in, you know, and says, okay, no, we're not doing that. We're doing something different. And then, of course, we see it every year. Kids that thought they were going in the 1st and the 2nd didn't go, or sometimes didn't even get drafted. And then you're sitting there looking and trying to figure out, why did this kid go before that kid? So it's really interesting. I knew, you know, of course, I knew that you would have a different perspective having to go through that process. And then having your son, to me, Dorian and Shador's circumstances in terms of just how they played, the programs that they played in, were similar. When you look at, like, when Dorian was at UCLA, he, you know, they talked about, you know, Shador having, you know, he's just on the run a lot and, you know, having to make it happen. I feel like Dorian had similar, you know, circumstances at UCLA and just having to make it happen, you know, and he did so well, you know, at UCLA in college, and then being drafted in the 5th round. You would have expected, you know, that he would have gone sooner, but there are so many different circumstances and reasons why, you know, things are changed. But when so him going to the Browns, and I think about Shador's situation, going in, there are 4 guys ahead of Shador, right? And then Dorian, when he went to the Browns, there were 3 guys ahead of him. What was that like? What was his mindset like, knowing that he's going to the Browns? And the Browns already has a reputation of, you know, being a program that you really, you know, you're going to have to fight, you know, like a dog. And then you get in there, you got 3 guys ahead of you. What was his mindset like?
I mean, I think first and foremost, he was grateful, you know, because like you said, so many guys think that they're getting drafted and don't.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get the undrafted free agent, and their careers end just like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there was, obviously grateful for the opportunity. And then it was, okay, it's time to go to work. And it was time to, get your, Cleveland is very much a blue collar town. They've, with the auto industry and things like that. I was like, get your lunch pail and be ready to go to work. Be ready to, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to grind. You're going to have to know that playbook. You're going to have to be present in meetings. You're going to have to do all of the things that they expect someone who's starting the position to do. I will say, some of that came with a learning curve, So like one of the things that I didn't realize, and I was part of it, I think maybe it's because I just didn't ask questions, but part of the situation too was, like they were quizzing him every week or every so many days regarding the playbook and stuff. And Dorian was like, he calls me one day and he's like angry. He's like, Mom, he's like, I'm passing these quizzes. I'm getting at 80%. Like, I don't understand what the issue is. Well, for me as an academic, because the GM had called him and was like, you aren't doing what you need to do. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm getting at 80%. Me as the academic, the first thing that in my mind is there must be a different definition of passing. And so they were expecting him to get like 100 on those quizzes as opposed to just passing, Gotcha. And so I like called my cousin, and said, hey, like kind of what's the deal? And he was like, no, he's like, that's what they do. He's like, my cousin played defensive back and safety. And he was like, I had to do those, because I had to demonstrate that I knew the plays and could call the defense. And so, I told Dorian that, and he was like, okay, so it was shifting another gear and stuff for him. Right. And I think he did what he did well. He did what he needed to do. He was not going to unseat Deshaun Watson as the starter. Right. But he did come in there and, moved his way up to being the backup.
Right. Because he beat out two guys. Right. Joshua and what is it, Kellen?
Yes.
Kellen Mott. So he came in and beat out two guys to be that number 2 guy behind Deshaun Watson. And I remember clearly because we were watching and cheering for him. I remember seeing, everybody reporting that he was killing it, in camp, as a rookie coming in. So, I mean, that's amazing. And that does speak obviously to his work ethic and his talent. And, this is what we were seeing. And a lot of us, Vanita and I also were talking about with Shedeur, coming in and having to come in behind 4 guys and knowing that you're going to be in a dogfight, but, that's what it is, no matter where you are. And even whether it's 1, 2, 3 guys, that's what it is. And if you are him, then that's what you got to do.
Right. You have to be prepared to go to work, and you have to be prepared to show that you can do this,
and stay there, not just get there, but stay there. Because like you said, every year you're watching the draft and you're looking to see who's getting drafted, how that's going to impact your team, because they're always looking for somebody to come in, to replace or that's going to compete. Right. And that's what I noticed, that the coach one of the guys who was sitting in the room when they announced that they were drafting Shador, they had asked him, they said, well, you already have, a packed room with quarterbacks. And he says, we like to have competition, and I just wonder about that. I mean, did Dorian feel it was just like, okay, we just want to have y'all compete, or were they, I mean, how did he feel about that?
So I'll say his rookie season, they're going into the rookie season, there was that competition. Then the second year, there was competition, but we have to remember Dorian finished his rookie season on injured reserve. And because of that, and he had a pretty serious hip injury, he actually did not get cleared for practice or anything until the day before mandatory minicamp in June. So he was down basically from Christmas Day until the beginning of June.
Wow.
And so, that kind of, to a point, limits the competition. And teams are already starting to, think about what else are we going to be, what's our options and things like that.
Right.
So going into the second year, it was different. It was just very different. And, again, you can get mad, you can get angry, or you can say, you know what, I'm going to work every day, and I'm going to, I'm going to do my job, and, even like I tell my students, like I told Dorian, like, you have to give them a reason to fire you. Do not do that. Go in there and do your job every day, and hopefully you'll get through all of it. But if you go in there and give them a reason, then boom, you're going to be out the door.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's interesting that, as mothers, obviously you think they're grown, you think they're in the NFL, they got it, that they don't need us, but they need that person in their ear to remind them, just how strong, resilient they are, and just to push them like you would when he might have been playing the Pop Warner. Like, no, you got to get back out there and you got to do what you do if you want to play this game.
Right. And it's, and to a point, you have friends and stuff that you can talk to, but not everybody's in the NFL. And then not everybody's a quarterback in the NFL. And not everybody's then a black quarterback in the NFL. And, the three of us are old enough to remember where there weren't black quarterbacks in the NFL, So it is a different situation. And so now Dorian's been traded to Philadelphia, and
Eagles.
Eagles, and we're like, fly Eagles fly, we're like, my kids are like, we gotta learn the fight song, we gotta learn the sayings, we gotta do, and I'm just like, okay, but part of what that has meant is, like, I have a day job. I'm a faculty member at UNLV. So when we got news that he got traded, I couldn't just drop everything and say, okay, now I got to plan a move from Cleveland to Philadelphia, because, he still has his place in Cleveland, even though he was in Orange County at the time.
Right.
So, it's like, somebody has to be there to manage that. And even, I go back to when Dorian was at UCLA, and we would have meetings with coaching staff and athletics. And I was very clear. I was like, oh, I will be up in the middle of all of this. I said, because we ain't talking about an ankle injury or a knee injury. I said, we are talking about something that could come down to life and death.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, y'all gonna go on about your business. And I'm gonna be the one who has to pick up the pieces with my son, you know, when something happens. So I'm gonna be all up in the middle of this. And so y'all might get used to it. And I'm gonna ask you questions and I'm gonna tell you what I think. You know? So, you know, I think, you know, as a mom, that's what we do, and we have to stay empowered to do that.
Yes.
Because our boys, our kids, them, you know, because I got a daughter too. I got 2 boys and a girl. And, you know, my daughter's texting me now, Mom, I don't feel good. What do I need to do? You know, like we have to stay involved.
That's so true. We're always gonna mother. Mothers never stop mommying, right?
And sometimes our kids are gonna need their moms. You know, they're not gonna need, you know, the agent or the whoever. They're gonna need somebody. And that's what I've always created with my house, is like, this is a safe space. When, you know, Dorian was going through things in high school, we talked about it in the car. When we got home, we didn't talk about football. We were family, academics, you know, he, ha, ha, and whatever. We weren't, you know, football in the house. We had to have moments of separation.
That's true.
And so, you know, like Dorian knows he can come home and he knows Mom's house, I don't have to worry about football. You know.
And you do need that safe space. You mentioned how there was a time when we didn't have Black quarterbacks. You mentioned just have moments of separation from football and being with family. That brings me to what Vanita and I have been speaking about, and the rest of the world has been speaking about this weekend, and that is Shedeur and how things went down for him in this NFL draft. I know you got a kid still playing in the NFL, and sometimes some conversations are not for public, but I'm curious to know what is your feeling about just how this whole weekend went and how things were handled with Shedeur?
When you sent me that question, I've been thinking about that. And part of me would say that, or will say, is that I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes we don't know about.
Right.
Okay. So I saw yesterday, day before, that, you know, Dion was acting as his agent. I don't know if that is true or not, or if they had somebody advising. But that's what was said. And so in that role, I don't know, you know, what Dion did in terms of reaching out to teams throughout the process to find out what was going on. Okay, so I will say that. So, you know, and I think, because I'll be honest, I've thought about becoming an NFL agent.
Yeah.
Some days, job makes me mad. I'm like, look, all you need is a graduate degree, and I got 2. So I'm like,
and you can get that certification,
right?
You know,
and you sit for the exam and pay for the testing and everything and the background check. I could be an agent. You know, I know I would never represent my kid because I think I need that separation. You know. So, you know, so on the one hand, you know, I think from an agent perspective, you know, what were the conversations that were had or not had, and that we need to be aware of, or, you know, were they even aware of it? On the other hand, I think the media overplayed this and hyped this up quite a bit. Like if you think about it and if you go back, like there wasn't much shown of Cam Ward, who went number 1, because they were too busy talking about Shedeur.
Yeah.
And they talked about Shedeur all damn weekend, to the point where I honestly did not want to watch the draft. I was glad when he finally got drafted. You know, there's 275 people. This isn't just Shedeur's day in the sun.
Right.
And I remember my friends who over the years we text about the draft and what's going on. You know, when Shedeur didn't get drafted Friday night, they were like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And I said, you know, as much as y'all worried about Shedeur, I'm worried about Shiloh.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because that's, you know, he's also supposed to be draft eligible and nobody's talking about him. You know, let alone that's just in your own household, let alone across the whole country, what's going on.
All those other kids.
Right. And so I was just kind of like, and I haven't dug around enough, like, to look at, do I think, you know, if you listen to the, you know, the anonymous sources, you know, which I would say you have to take those with a grain of salt, who said that he was this and he was that, you know, that could be. I mean, not everybody is for everybody, you know. So I, you know, like trying to tear him down like that, you know, but at the same time, you know, Mel Kiper, you know, they love him to death, but Mel don't always be getting it right either.
I know that's right. I was just looking at him like, what?
So, you know, and so I think ESPN did him a disservice by promoting him the way they did. You know, like they're talking about Shedeur. I'm like, dude, I want to see who else is getting drafted right now. Yeah. I know we're in the 6th round, but I want to see who else is being drafted, because you know what? Some great players have come out of the 5th, 6th, and 7th round, as well as an undrafted free agent.